Here we are. I know you're sick of COVID-19. I'm sick of COVID-19. You're sick of COVID-19. The world is sick of COVID-19. But once again, we're going to look at three central planks to the COVID-19 crisis, because it is a pandemic and it does affect the world, although I'll be concentrating on what's happening in Australia. I want to look at the health costs, I want to look at the economic costs, and I want to bring in a new plank, the security costs, because there are huge costs that need to be paid. And it's exceptionally important that we don't continue to be cringing, carping, complaining consumers. It's important that we become active citizens who want to change the social and political dynamic in this country. COVID-19 is a health curse, but it's also a potential game changer as far as society is concerned, because the central issue that has been exposed by the COVID-19 crisis is the inability of corporate capitalism, and capitalism is private investment for private profit, to offer any solutions whatsoever to the current crisis. You haven't seen solutions come from the corporate sector. Solutions have come from the government, and the government is using your money and my money to fund these solutions. And they are using your children and my children and your grandchildren and my grandchildren to fund this response for the next few decades. Now, although our treasurer, our beloved treasurer, Mr. Josh Frydenberg, likes to tell us that, the World Bank is wrong, the fact is that Australia is highly exposed to the COVID-19 crisis. We've done really well as far as the health costs are concerned, because we have been able to contain the crisis, not just because of social isolation and social distancing, but because Australians, the very great majority of Australians, have realised that we need to work cooperatively together in order to contain this virus, contain this threat. And most Australians have been doing the right thing regarding social isolation, although there are a lot of issues which I'll raise in the security costs later on. So health-wise, as I said before, there are four things that hold us in good stead. The four things the American health system doesn't have. One, we have a universal public health system. Two, we have Medicare, which is a universal medical insurance scheme which allows all Australians to access private doctors. That's two. Three, we actually have a Pharmaceutical Benefits Scheme which subsidises medicines, not just for people on social security benefits. And four, we have a social security net. And despite 4 decades of globalisation, privatisation, corporatisation and deregulation, Australian people have been able to agitate people like you and me, people who are part of the Defend and Extend Medicare Coalition, people who are part of the Public Housing Coalition. We have been able to agitate for decades to maintain these systems, although they have been weakened by the corporate sector, although they've been weakened by an orgy of privatisation and globalisation. They are still there, and they provide the infrastructure and framework which puts Australia in a good position to deal with the COVID-19 crisis, even if the number of cases explode because social isolation and social distancing don't work. So the health costs are manageable. And although the government has been found wanting in terms of no local production regarding protective equipment like gowns, masks, goggles, and medical equipment like ventilators, and having enough trained people in the public health sector, the fact is that we are better prepared than most. Now let's look at the economic costs. Although the government has put in a number of initiatives which haven't actually started yet, like Job Seeker, where there'll be a COVID-19 payment which will start on the 27th of April, the Job Seeker and the Job Keeper program, which is supposed to keep people in employment, where the government gives employers money to pay back to their employees. But the economic system is profound. And it's profound because of the nature of the economy we have and because we are one of the most corporatised nations on earth. Although we have an extensive small business network, and although that network employs almost 40% of every Australian, there's 1.8 million in the public services around this country, 5 million in the small business sector, and the rest are taken up by the corporate sector. The fact is that this COVID-19 crisis will spell the demise of many small businesses, because most small businesses have got an overdraft with their bank, and most small businesses don't own the premises they work out of, they actually rent them. And the government initiatives at the state and federal level which have been put in place have been found wanting, grossly wanting. If you have a lease with an owner, you cannot break that lease. If you negotiate a reduction in your rent, you have to repay that amount within the next 2 years on top of the normal rent you are paying. If you defer your mortgage, the banks are still charging interest on your mortgage repayments. If you get rent assistance, that rent assistance is not enough. You may not be able to be evicted, but if you've got any assets, that owner of that particular property can chase you and force you into bankruptcy after the COVID-19 crisis, because you're supposed to repay that money. So how can you repay that money when there are so many people, when there is no cash flow? And this is now spread to small businesses around the country, which are shutting every day because there is no money out there for people to buy things. As I was joking with a friend before, it's a little bit like living in an Islamic fundamentalist society, you know, apart from the prayer aspect of it. The fact is that there's no entertainment, you can't do much except, you know, drown your sorrows. That's about it, which you can't do in Islamic fundamentalist society, obviously. So, but I'm concerned about the long-term costs, because let's not forget, the three primary earners in Australia are: one, education. Education. Billions of dollars come into this country from students from overseas who buy positions in tech colleges, high schools, universities. That will dry up. The next big earner and employer, a huge employer, is tourism. That will dry up. It'll take years, maybe even a decade, for international tourism to reach the crescendo it reached. And the third thing is mineral exports. And as we've seen, one good thing about COVID-19 is the reduction in greenhouse emissions. There'll be a reduction of 2 billion tonnes this year of greenhouse emissions, because petrol consumption has dropped by 50% and aircraft fuel consumption has dropped by 70%. So it doesn't matter what Saudi Arabia, United States and Russia do in terms of decreasing the amount of oil they're going to produce. The fact is there is no demand for oil. No wonder it's less than $20 a barrel as I speak. So we are in for a particularly hard landing. And then at the end of all this comes payback time. Because the $1 trillion that's been borrowed, or created out of thin air, not borrowed, created out of thin air, will have to be paid back with a little bit of interest, obviously. And how do you pay back $1 trillion? Do you attack the corporate sector, or do you attack people who are on social security payments? Do you attack working people? Do you increase their taxes? Do you introduce a levy? And the list goes on and on. So these are all questions that we have to look at. So economically, what we need to look at is solutions. I'm not here just to complain. Concepts like a universal basic income, which cushions people from the problem of an emergency, whether it's a natural catastrophe, a pandemic, a climate emergency, the fact that everybody receives a basic wage, and that people who earn money, that basic wage comes back in terms of taxation, and people who don't earn money find themselves in a position where they can look after their basic necessities, their rent, their food, their energy bills. Today we've had governments trying to catch up with all these funny little things they're doing, job seeker, coronavirus, job keep, and the list goes on and on. But we don't need any of that for universal basic income. And secondly, I think it's important that we actually look at expanding the economy, because the Australian economy is based two tiers. There's the private economy and the public economy. There's 1.8 million Australians in the public service, both state and federal, and there's 10 million Australians in the private sector. What we need is an expansion of the cooperative and collectivist movement. What we need is a mechanism by which funding, seeded funding, can be provided to collectives and cooperatives. Now, you don't get rich working in a collective or a cooperative, but you do meet your basic needs, and you do have a little bit of money left over for a little bit of fun. Now, security. It's interesting how people over the security costs over the last few days have realised what happens when you give police unlimited power. All the states in this country have declared a state of emergency. That gives the government extraordinary powers, and it gives the police extraordinary powers. And we saw over Easter the ridiculous situation of citizens being questioned and fined in Victoria, especially $1,650 for eating pizza in a car with a friend. Ridiculous things, totally ridiculous things. Obviously the police are very concerned that it's going to erode confidence, but I'd just like to remind people this is the experience that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders have had since the invasion day. This is the experience that young black people in urban centres and regional centres experience every day, where they are targets of police who focus on them. Now the police are focusing on the community. The community is beginning to understand. Now the community is beginning to understand what unbridled power means. That's why we have laws, we have courts, we have a division between the legal system and the police. That's why we're not part of a police state. And we have to be very careful over the next 6 months, because as I said before, it is not going to be business as usual, because people like you and me are going to be agitating for things like a universal basic income. We'll be agitating that the rich actually bear the cost of the COVID-19 crisis bailout. We're going to be agitating for the creation of a new economic system, a new tier in the economic system based on collectives and cooperatives. We're going to be agitating for the nationalisation of the mining sector to provide the resources necessary to bankroll these ideas. We're going to be agitating for essential services to actually be re-owned by the people. But this time, instead of essential services being the property of the state government or the federal government, which can sell them at any time, this time we want them incorporated in the Australian Constitution. So it's only the Australian people who can actually make the decision on whether to sell or not an essential service. Because what we are harvesting is the legacy of 40 years of privatisation, which means the private sector buying at peppercorn rents or bargain basement prices, public institutions which provide essential services, which have been built up by the blood, sweat and tears of generations. And globalisation, everybody's now talking about localisation. Isn't it ridiculous that we don't even actually have enough masks or coats or protective equipment, and there was nobody here that could make enough, because we're relying on imports. And think of the carbon footprint, huge carbon footprint, importing basic stuff. So we'll be agitating for a lot of things, not just me, not just you, but a lot of people who are going to find themselves in exceptionally difficult economic circumstances, who will see their whole livelihoods washed away, their whole livelihoods. And then it'll be interesting to see what the government will do at the state and federal level, because governments can declare states of emergency, not just because of a pandemic, but because of agitation and protest from the community at large for a change in government direction. So keep your ears and eyes open regarding governments attempting to maintain this state of emergency for longer than is necessary. And that's what we are going to see. That's what we saw after 9/11. That's what we are seeing now. And it's exceptionally important that we regain those few rights we have. So think of the COVID-19 crisis in three ways: health costs, economic costs, security costs. We're going through the health costs now. We're beginning to go through the economic costs, and I think we will have a severe recession, possibly a depression, especially in this country, because of our over-reliance on overseas finance, over-reliance on tourism, over-reliance on overseas students. And thirdly, look at the security concerns, not just the short-term security concerns about how police around the country are interpreting laws without any judicial oversight, but think of the security concerns long-term. If people like you and me, people like the members of public interest before corporate interests, become a registered federal political party, become involved in extra parliamentary activity, protests, let's see how they react, because it will not be business as usual. I guarantee you, if enough people say it won't be business as usual, it will not be business as usual. So, if you're not a member of public interest before corporate interests, we need 550 members to register as a federal political party. If you're not a member, I suggest you go to the website, pipsy.net, download the application form, fill it out, send it back to us. If you haven't got an internet connection, you can always write to me at Post Office Box 20, Parkville, 3052. Just put Secretary Pipsy, although I'm not the Secretary, I'm a registered officer, or you can always leave a message on 0439 395 489. 0439 395 489. Hopefully this new super duper microphone has done its job, and there's a little interruption, but as I said before, we film outside. That's what we do. So if you've got a beautiful studio out there which you're happy to share, give us a call. I'm happy to use it. All the best. Look after yourself, your family, your friends, your companions, and remember, we can create that new world in our hearts. Join public interest before corporate interests today.